Vicki Gunderson, our next speaker, was most recently an American Chemical Society-sponsored AAAS Congressional Fellow with the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources under Chairman Ron Wyden. Prior to that, Vicki served as a policy analyst at the U.S. National Nanotechnology Coordination Office, an executive branch office that coordinates nanotechnology research and development across 26 federal agencies. Vicki is a chemist who studied energy and charge transfer principles for efficient solar energy conversion. Today, she will be discussing keeping the Federal Helium Reserve afloat.
All right, so this is gonna be a much lighter topic. Jokes. So I'm gonna tell my story about my congressional fellowship through some pictures that are not my own, and some opinions that are totally my own and not the federal government, the Senate committee, my old boss, etc. So as many of you know, this kind of points out, I'm gonna talk about helium. How many of you are familiar with this helium problem? Raise your hand. How many of you have a picture like this somewhere in a box that shows your first memory of helium? Yeah, so this is me embracing my first experience with helium, some balloons. Party balloons, they make kids happy. They're one of the uses. There are many, many, many uses of helium. And my kind of experience has evolved over time from computer chips to the cell phones we have in our pocket to getting an MRI when I tore my ACL to kind of experiences like this being in a research lab where helium plays a critical role in our research enterprise. It's one of the big issues that I think I got behind when I started to feel shortages as a scientist, knew that it affected my day-to-day life, started to understand that I can't do stuff if I don't have the resources. So last year, I started to work for this guy, Senator Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon. And so Ron Wyden cares about helium, and I care about helium because I work for Ron Wyden, for many purposes. Intel manufactures semiconductor chips, computer chips. He also then took over the chairmanship of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. So Jeff Bingaman, the first guy, retires. You go down the line in the Senate. Third guy kind of takes over, and it's my new boss. And so part of the process was new Congress shows up. What are the problems that we tried to work on last Congress? How can we work on those? So one of those problems was this helium problem. So I've talked about my relationship with helium. So what is the federal government's relationship with helium? So 3 acts. The first one, the Helium Act of 1925. We got in the business of helium because we realized we needed to have some blimps. Blimps were strategic. We wanted to spy on people. So we created an act that basically allowed us to extract helium. We got in the helium business. We were extracting it. We were selling it. We were using it for federal research. We were using it for things like this. No longer hydrogen. Hydrogen goes boom. We were doing that until about the 1960s. And then in the 1960s, we realized, man, we don't really want to be in the business of extracting, natural resources. So we started to pay people. We're going to pay the private sector. We're going to create a stockpile. We realized it's still important. Put some helium in the ground. It cost us $1.3 billion. Bought a bunch of helium, stuck it in the ground, and there it kind of sat. We allowed to do our business. In the 1990s, 1996, the Privatization Act, we're like, we need to get out of this business. We don't need a stockpile. Private sector's doing well. We're just going to sell it off. We're going to sell it off to the point where we repay that $1.3 billion we used to store it all on the ground. Great idea. In the process, however, we put the private sector out of business. So we used to have a big private sector, now we don't. Currently, we're in the middle of a shortage. How many of you can get a party balloon now? You really can't. It's kind of an issue. So what's happening today, if you got kids, it is, let alone for the scientific enterprise. So right now we're in the middle of a shortage. We've got a problem. October 7th, we're going to repay that debt. We still got some helium left in that stockpile. Private sector really hasn't picked up. The doors are closing. So we may be talking about the government shutting down, most of us not getting paid in a couple of weeks. This is actually a huge problem. All of our scientific R&D, all of our computer chip manufacturing, welders, party balloons, etc., all out of business October 7th. Huge, huge job problem. So what happens on the Hill? Well, we think back, what have we done in the past? And so this is actually a kind of fun story about AAAS fellows. There's been a bunch of us. Marcus, Allison, Kevin Rennert, myself, Kelly Crick. So we're going back a couple generations of fellows that have been working on this helium problem, trying to generate or draft legislation. So I walk in, perfect timing for me. There's a deadline. Congress can do something. So I walk in, new Congress. This new team, this dynamic pair, Senator Ron Wyden, Senator Lisa Murkowski, staffs get together and start drafting up legislation. Basically, we generated a draft. We're going to go through the legislative process a little bit. Generated a draft, put it out for the public, a discussion draft. Get a ton of feedback. So we've taken meetings, we take more meetings. We introduce a bill, S-783. It drops. Little hopper. It's actually really anticlimactic. An intern goes and walks it down there. It's not so fun. But months of hard work, this happens. Take more feedback, because nothing is perfect in the legislative process. More and more feedback. We actually want to get public feedback. So one of the things we did was we hold a hearing. That's me. As you can notice, I'm not very good at public speaking. I'm not very good at being on camera. I'm a person who sits behind a desk and actually just passes notes. But this is the committee hearing that we had. Where we received public feedback. So we've introduced a bill, we've had just a discussion draft, we introduced a bill, we're publicly getting feedback, more and more feedback. Basically, you're constantly getting feedback. Call your congressman, we listen. We marked up the piece of legislation during my year. So that's basically the staff ahead of time negotiate a bill based upon the feedback, everyone kind of approves it, it's over and done in like 10 seconds. It's not very fun. But we mark up a bill, we write a committee report, which is also kind of exciting. It's referred to the floor. And so before things go to the floor in the Senate, you hotline a bill. You basically let people know that this bill is happening. Great, because everything has to act by kind of unanimous consent, which we can go into, you can call me. But basically what happened now is my year was up. So what happens when your year is up? You're kind of an outsider. You get kicked to the curb, you join the executive branch, you've got nothing you can do, and all of a sudden you're like, we've got this problem, it's going away, what's gonna happen? So cutting edge, last night, the Senate passed the piece of legislation, 97-2, really exciting. But it wasn't actually my legislation technically. I mean, we amended a House bill because apparently there's two houses. So previously the Senate was a little slow. We were a few steps behind. The House actually passed a bill 394-1. The one was apparently a mistake. The two no votes in the Senate, not mistakes. Those were actually intentional. So the House has acted. So we sent a bill yesterday, the Senate sent a bill over to the House yesterday. We'll see if they can act. The bill is supposed to be a little bit reflective of a compromise bill. As I like to point out, it is not Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but at times it can feel similar. Although I will say it was great to work on a topic where you actually had bipartisan, bicameral support. Guy walked in, 5 years, he's like, I've never had one of these meetings. So basically the helium cliff happens October 7th. The House has to act, pass legislation. We basically have a week and a half, and it's just a bill dreaming of becoming a law. So we'll see if the helium cliff gets diverted, if the government stays open, but that's kind of my year as a fellow.